In the world of the elite, some debts are paid in wire transfers, but others are paid in blood and bone. For exactly 100 years, the Kang family empire has been a golden cage, tethered to a contract signed in the shadows of 1926. Today, the interest on that debt has finally come due, and it's asking for everything. The arena lights hum with a prestigious, heavy tension as Seon-young Kang stands in the background, his immaculate suit a sharp contrast to the raw grit of the boxing ring. He isn't watching a sport, he is watching the survival of his grandfather's legacy. Across from him stands Archer Bowman, the golden arrow, draped in white and gold, the living personification of the family that has siphoned billions from the Kangs for generations. But between them stands the debt breaker, Malika Akath, clad in bold red. Her eyes are locked forward with a cold, disciplined focus that reveals she isn't fighting for fame. She is fighting for judgment. As the referee, Daniel Whitmore, moves to signal the start, he covers his mouth in a moment of visible shock. He knows what the world doesn't. If Malika falls, the Kang empire liquidates, and she becomes a ward of the Bowman estate forever. This isn't just a championship match. It is the final round of a century-long war. Do you believe one woman can break a 100-year curse? If you're ready for a story about justice that doesn't wait for permission, hit that subscribe button right now and join the AfroKorean Grit Stories family. You don't want to miss a single second of this showdown. Seon-young Kang's private jet touched down in the humid heat of the Rift Valley, miles away from the sterile glass towers of Seoul. He wasn't here for a merger. He was chasing a rumor of a fighter who moved with the grace of an angel and the tactical mind of a grandmaster. As his polished shoes crunched against the dry earth of the remote training camp, he saw her. Malika Akath was in the center of a makeshift ring, facing 3 elite sparring partners at once. She didn't move with the frantic energy of a brawler. She moved with a calm, rhythmic precision that made her opponents look like they were standing still. Seon-young watched in silence, his fingers tightening around the dossier containing the 1926 contract. Every time Malika deflected a strike, he saw a link in his family's chain begin to rattle. She didn't fight for the crowd or the glory. Her focus was internal, a disciplined fire that Seon-young recognized as the only thing capable of melting a century-old debt. When the session ended, Malika didn't reach for a towel or water. She turned her gaze toward the shadowed corner where the billionaire stood, as if she had sensed his desperate energy the moment he arrived. "You didn't come this far for a boxing lesson, Mr. Kang," she said, her voice a steady anchor in the wind. Seon-young stepped forward, the weight of his empire pressing down on his shoulders. He opened the folder, but before he could speak, Malika's eyes narrowed at the seal on the document. The air between them grew heavy as she reached out, touching the faded ink of the Bowman family crest. "I know this mark," she whispered, her calm demeanor finally fracturing into a look of cold realization. "But you are mistaken, Seon-young. I am not the one who will save your empire. I am the reason it was targeted in the first place." The glass walls of Seon-young's Seoul boardroom offered a panoramic view of an empire built on decades of industrial brilliance. Yet the air inside felt as thin as a tomb. Across the polished mahogany table, Malika Akath sat with a spine of iron, her presence grounding the billionaire's frantic energy. Seon-young pushed a digital tablet toward her, the 1926 generational debt glowing in harsh blue light. He explained the terrifying terms of the fate clause. This wasn't just a sports contract, but a modern-day bill of sale. If she failed to defeat Archer Bowman, the Bowman family wouldn't just take the Kang billions. They would legally claim Malika herself as a ward of their estate, a permanent asset to be used for their own prestige and profit. The stakes were no longer just about a company's survival. They were about a woman's fundamental freedom. Seon-young's voice trembled as he offered her a sum of money that could rebuild a nation. But Malika didn't even look at the numbers. She looked through the glass, her eyes reflecting the neon lights of the city. "My ancestors lived and died, knowing the weight of chains they did not forge," she said, her voice dropping to a low, resonant frequency. "You think you are asking me to risk my life for your money, Seon-young, but I am fighting because a Bowman should have never been allowed to own a Kang, and they will certainly never own an Akath." She reached out and pressed her thumb against the biometric scanner, sealing the terms of the match. As the green confirmed light flashed, a hidden chime echoed through the room, a notification that the Bowmans had been alerted. Malika stood to leave, but stopped when a video file automatically began to play on the wall. It wasn't Archer Bowman training. It was a live feed of Malika's childhood home in East Africa, surrounded by men in white suits. Seon-young's face went pale as he realized the debt didn't just start with his grandfather. It started with hers. The glare of 1,000 camera flashes transformed the stadium into a sea of artificial lightning as Archer Bowman stepped onto the platform, draped in shimmering gold silk that looked more like royal armor than athletic wear. Known across 3 continents as the Golden Arrow, his reputation was built on a terrifying statistic. In a decade of professional combat, he had never been bled, his defensive mastery as impenetrable as a high-security vault. He moved with a practiced, predatory elegance, soaking in the roar of the crowd, while Seon-young Kang watched from the ringside, his hands clasped so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Archer didn't just represent a champion. He was the living embodiment of the Bowman's unchecked authority, a man who viewed the upcoming match not as a contest, but as a final collection notice. When Archer finally came face-to-face with Malika, his smile was cold and dismissive, flickering with the arrogance of a man who believed the world was his inheritance. He leaned in, the scent of expensive cologne masking the scent of the gym, and gestured toward Malika's bold red uniform. A beautiful color, red destiny. He mocked, his voice carrying just enough edge to be heard by the surrounding microphones. It's a shame you chose to wear the color of the blood you're about to lose for a man who can't even fight his own battles. He looked past her to Seon-young, eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger for the Kang assets he was already mentally liquidating. Malika remained a statue of disciplined East African granite, but as Archer turned to play for the cameras, she noticed a subtle, rhythmic twitch in his left hand, the exact same twitch she had seen on the men in white suits at her family home. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Archer wasn't just the fighter, he was the commander. As the press conference ended, Archer leaned over the podium and whispered a final, chilling secret. You think you're fighting for Seon-young's freedom, Malika, but look at the contract again. If I win, I don't just own your future, I already own your past. The sterile, echoing halls of the weigh-in arena felt like a vacuum, sucking the air out of Seon-young's lungs as he watched Malika step onto the scales. Her discipline was a silent roar, but the billionaire could feel the unseen walls of the Bowman trap closing in. As he turned to follow her toward the dressing rooms, a firm, weathered hand gripped his elbow, pulling him into the shadows of a concrete alcove. It was Daniel Whitmore, the senior international referee whose shocked expression in the earlier press photos now made terrifying sense. His face was a mask of grim urgency, his eyes darting toward the security cameras before he leaned in, his voice a frantic whisper that chilled Seon-young to the bone. You don't understand what you've walked into. Mr. Kang, Whitmore hissed, his breath hitching. He revealed a truth that hadn't appeared in any of Seon-young's high-priced intelligence reports. Malika wasn't the first debt breaker the Kangs had sent. 3 others had preceded her over the last 30 years. Elite specialists recruited in secret. They didn't just lose their matches. They vanished from the face of the earth the moment the final bell rang. Whitmore warned that the ring was rigged with more than tactical disadvantages. It was a theater of disappearance where the rules of sport were used to mask a deeper, more permanent collection of human assets. Seon-young's heart hammered against his ribs as he realized he might have led Malika not to a victory, but to an abyss. Whitmore's grip tightened as he delivered the final, crushing blow. The Bowman family hadn't just siphoned money. They were building a private collection of the world's most elite, failed challengers. Just as Seon-young moved to pull Malika from the event, his phone chimed with a high-priority alert from his security team. He looked at the screen and went numb. The Daniel Whitmore, standing in front of him, wasn't on the official referee roster for tonight, and the real Whitmore had just been found, unconscious in his hotel room. The bell's chime cut through the electrified air like a guillotine, signaling the start of a fight, a century in the making. The world held its breath as Malika Akath and Archer Bowman circled one another, a dance of red and gold beneath the blinding arena lights. Archer moved with the fluid, terrifying arrogance of a man who had never known defeat, his strikes coming with the speed of a viper. Suddenly, a thunderous hook from Archer connected, a blow so precise and powerful that a collective gasp rippled through the thousands in attendance. Malika's head snapped back, her body reeling toward the ropes as the commentators screamed that the debt breaker was about to fall in the opening minute. Seon-young Kang gripped the velvet railing of his box, his heart plummeting into his stomach. He looked for the light of life in Malika's face, fearing the fate clause was about to claim her forever. But as she steadied herself, Seon-young saw something the cameras missed. Her eyes were not clouded with the haze of pain or the panic of a victim. Instead, they were crystalline, darting with a mechanical, cold intelligence. She wasn't hurting, she was calculating. Every move Archer made, every flick of his wrist and shift in his weight, was being downloaded into her tactical mind. She had taken the golden arrows, best shot just to measure the distance of his soul. As the round drew to a close, Malika didn't retreat. She stepped forward, a ghost of a smile touching her lips that made Archer's predatory confidence falter for the first time. She leaned into a clinch, her voice a low vibration against his ear that the microphones barely caught. "Your ancestors taught you how to win, Archer," she whispered, "but mine taught me how to survive the win." As they broke apart, the fake Daniel Whitmore signaled the end of the round. But he didn't look at the fighters. He looked directly at Seon-young and pointed at the arena floor. Beneath the canvas, a red light began to pulse, and Seon-young realized the ring itself was beginning to change. The transition between rounds felt like a descent into a cold, digital winter. As Seon-young scrambled to coordinate with his ringside medical team, his high-tech tablet suddenly turned a bloodless gray, flashing a notification that made his breath hitch. Asterisk accounts suspended, insolvency protocol active. Asterisk the Bowmans hadn't waited for the final bell. They had triggered the liquidation clause early, effectively ghosting his entire support staff. The specialized doctors and cutmen, realizing their payroll had vanished into the ether, retreated into the shadows of the arena, leaving Malika sitting alone on a wooden stool, her breathing heavy and her red uniform stained with the sweat of the first round. In that moment, the billionaire industrialist Seon-young Kang died. And the man was born. He didn't call for security or shout for lawyers. Instead, he vaulted over the velvet railing, his immaculate white suit jacket hitting the floor as he reached for a basin of water and a roll of athletic gauze. With trembling but determined hands, he began to dress the swelling above Malika's eye himself, his fingers slick with the reality of the stakes they were playing for. The cameras zoomed in, broadcasting the image of the world's most powerful heir kneeling in the dirt of a boxing corner, finally getting his hands dirty for a cause that money couldn't buy. Malika looked down at him, her stoic mask softening for a fraction of a second as he tightened the wraps around her knuckles. "They think they've cut our oxygen," Seon-young whispered, his voice stripped of all corporate polish. "But they've only made us lighter." Malika nodded, her cold focus returning as she prepared to stand. But as she gripped the ropes, she felt a strange vibration beneath her boots. Seon-young looked down and saw the red pulse from the floor was no longer just a light. It was a magnetic field. Archer Bowman wasn't just wearing gold silk. His gloves were humming with a low-frequency current that the fake referee was manually calibrating from his belt. Malika's heartbeat began to sync with the hum, and Seon-young realized the ring wasn't just changing. It was becoming a live circuit. The ring hummed with a predatory energy as the fight entered its most grueling phase, the canvas vibrating beneath Malika's boots. Archer Bowman surged forward, his gold and white form a blur of elite movement, forcing Malika into a tight clinch against the corner. As the fake referee moved with suspicious slowness to break them, Archer leaned his heavy weight against her, his lips brushing the side of her head. His voice was a cold, jagged whisper that pierced through the roar of the crowd. "You think you're the hero in a story about money. Malika, you think Seon-young is an innocent victim of high interest." He chuckled, a sound of pure malice. The debt wasn't a loan, it was a ransom. In 1926, the Kangs didn't sign for capital. They signed to cover up the fact that they betrayed your own lineage to build their first factory. The revelation hit Malika harder than any physical strike could. The world seemed to tilt as she realized the generational debt was a web of lies designed to keep two families, the Kangs and the Akoths, at each other's throats while the Bowmans played puppeteer. She wasn't just fighting for a billionaire's empire. She was fighting for a man whose ancestors had climbed to power on the backs of her own. For a split second, her guard dropped, her cold discipline wavering as she looked toward Seon-young, who was still frantically trying to stabilize the ring's magnetic pulse. Malika realized then that Seon-young didn't know. He was as much a prisoner of the lie as she was. The rage that had been fueled by purpose suddenly transformed into something sharper, a demand for absolute truth. She pushed Archer back, her eyes burning with a new, terrifying clarity. "The cycle ends tonight," she hissed, her voice loud enough for the ringside mics to catch. But as she prepared to strike, the arena lights suddenly cut to black. In the darkness, a voice boomed over the intercom, not the announcers, but a recorded message from 1926. And the voice on the tape belonged to her own grandfather. The crackling voice on the tape was a ghost from a century ago, but its words were a catalyst for a new kind of power. As the emergency lights flickered back to life, Malika stood in the center of the ring, her red uniform heavy with the weight of the truth. She was exhausted, her lungs burning and her muscles screaming under the magnetic pull of the rigged floor. But the confusion in her eyes had been replaced by a terrifying, divine clarity. Across from her, Archer Bowman sensed the shift. The golden arrow dropped his defensive shell, his face contorting into a mask of pure, desperate aggression. He loaded his signature knockout blow, a strike intended to end the Kang legacy and claim Malika as his prize forever. In that fraction of a second, Malika didn't see an opponent. She saw the architect of 100 years of misery. She remembered the meaning of her name, Malika, the angel. In East African lore, angels weren't just messengers of peace. They were the executors of judgment. As Archer lunged, Malika didn't retreat. She moved with a sudden, explosive grace that defied the magnetic drag of the canvas. She pivoted on a heel, slipping the golden arrow by a hair's breadth, and delivered a single, perfectly timed strike to Archer's guard. It wasn't a blow of anger, but one of absolute consequence. The impact didn't just shatter Archer's defensive posture, it seemed to shatter the very air in the arena. Archer, the man who had never been bled, fell to his knees, not from the physical force, but from the sudden, crushing realization that the debt breaker had seen through his entire family's myth. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a fear his ancestors had never known. The referee moved to start the count, but Malika didn't watch the fallen champion. She turned to the Daniel Whitmore lookalike and held out her hand. "The tape didn't end there," she said, her voice echoing over the stadium speakers. "My grandfather didn't sign a betrayal. He signed a trap." At that moment, the giant digital screens in the arena didn't show the fight. They began displaying the Bowman family's private bank records in real time. The silence that followed the scrolling bank records was more deafening than any roar the stadium had ever produced. As the digital data exposed a century of Bowman extortion, the magnetic field beneath the canvas died with a pathetic whine, and the fake referee stood frozen, his authority evaporating under the gaze of millions. The real Daniel Whitmore, having regained consciousness and flanked by international officials, marched into the ring to perform the final, rightful duty of his career. He gripped Malika's hand, not just the hand of a fighter, but the hand of a liberator, and hoisted it high toward the rafters. The generational debt was no longer a legal reality. It was a relic of a dead era. In the center of the ring, Seon-Young Kang pulled the original 1926 parchment from his inner pocket. As Malika watched, her breathing finally steadying, the billionaire struck a single match. The flame took hold of the yellowed paper, and as the golden arrow watched from the canvas, the contract turned to ash, the smoke rising like a ghost finally finding peace. Seon-Young looked at the empire he had saved and realized he no longer wanted to rule it. He turned to the cameras and announced his immediate resignation, choosing to liquidate the Kang industrial machine into a foundation dedicated to the very communities his ancestors had once exploited. The story didn't end with a corporate merger or a trophy. It ended months later in a quiet village in East Africa. Malika Akoth sat beneath a vast, open sky, the red boxing gloves now replaced by the blueprints for a school, and a legacy of her own making. She was no longer a debt breaker or a ward of an estate. She was a sovereign legend. As she looked at a letter from Seon-Young, a shadow fell over the porch. A man in a dark suit stood at the edge of her property, holding a golden arrow, not as a weapon, but as a message. Archer Bowman hadn't come for a rematch. He had come to tell her that the 1926 contract had a second page, and it had just been found. The fire of the 1926 contract has died, but a new mystery has just ignited. Malika broke the chains, yet the shadows of the past are never truly gone. Thank you for witnessing this high-stakes showdown of grit and justice. Seon-Young and Malika's journey has only just begun to uncover the truth. If you believe that no legacy is worth a lie, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing. Your engagement keeps these stories alive. Get ready, the second page is turning, and the next episode will change everything.